Hello, bienvenue and good morning. My name's theoliverpickard and this is Jolene for those of you who don't know. And last episode I mentioned that I've removed the exhaust from Jolene, and that's for a good reason. Let me show you. So this is the centre section of Jolene's exhaust. The exhaust in Jolene comes out the front and wraps around. I'll show you all that in a minute. But basically, a few episodes ago I removed Jolene's exhaust to paint it as part of a life hacks video. But when I removed it, I noticed that it's been welded, and it's been welded very, very badly. It looks fine when you look at it like that, and that's what I thought. Then when I removed the exhaust and took a closer look, I think someone's actually bent this pipe or snapped this pipe off at some point, because it's been welded all the way around here, it's been welded around here, it's been welded around here, and on the back side as well, here and here and here and here. And that's a very, very bad thing. Exhausts are welded when they're created. Obviously, when you make an exhaust, you have to weld it. But when they do that, they put a bung in one side and they feed gas into the other side, as well as welding with gas. And what that does, it shoves all the oxygen away so that the metal can be heated up and welded properly. And that's called TIG welding, tungsten inert gas welding. And that's the really beautiful, like, what do they call it, the stack of dimes welding, the beautiful artisanal welding that you think of when you think of beautiful welding. There's another one called MIG welding, which is more common, and that's when you feed wire in, but in both those sorts of welding you use gas, and the gas gets rid of the air. This has been stick welded, and stick welding uses like a pistol and a stick, and as you weld it kind of gets rid of the air. But what happens if you weld without gas is your weld just goes and it looks like seagull poo. It looks really, really nasty, and I think it's called ferocity. So what's happened is they've welded the exhaust up on the outside, but it's actually filled the tube full of ferocity, full of weld and full of crap. So Jolene isn't breathing right. I used it for a little bit, but I'm not happy. I can't drive around knowing that this is here, and knowing that I'm not just losing power, I'm losing fuel economy, I'm losing efficiency. Like, this is really bad. And this kind of process of detective work of what's been done to the car throughout its life and stuff, it's just part of having a classic car. So today we're going to replace this, and I have a brand new exhaust in a box. So a 2CV exhaust is made of 3 parts. It's super, super simple. Well, no, specifically an older 2CV, 425 2CV. It's made of a manifold, which is the thing that comes out of the engine. Then the pipe goes round the front, and there's a centre section. That's one piece. So that's part number 2. And then there's a silencer that goes behind the gearbox. The exhaust ends about here in this car. It's very, very simple. A 2CV6 and a Diane and stuff, they're more complicated, and the exhaust goes back into a collector, and then it goes all the way back to the back of the car. We don't have to deal with that today. It's not difficult even then. So we've got in here a brand new centre section. That's how it should look. A lovely, nice pipe. Okay, it's not all mandrel bent and stuff. It's been made with a normal pipe bender, but it's still a lovely, lovely thing, and it's a lot better quality than the one that came off it. So that's our new centre section, and it's I think it's slightly larger gauge tubing than the original, so it might actually give us a little bit of an improvement, as well as an improvement over the brokenness of the original. And we also have in this bag, we have a new rear section, because the rear section had a hole in it. It was only a tiny hole, but it did, I'll pick that up in a second, it did make Jolene sound like a narrowboat. So this is a new rear section, and that fits under the back of the gearbox, which is roughly here, but down there. And we're going to be fitting that as well. The issue with a 2CV exhaust of this type is that you're supposed to remove the engine to fit the new exhaust and to remove the old one. I haven't done that. I've actually left the engine in situ. I'll show you. There is a kind of a cheaty way to do it. So the cool thing about 2CVs is that there's not much to them. And because of that, I can actually unbolt the front of the car. And you may notice that I've removed the coil from the front of the engine and that these wires are the coil wires. And the reason for that is the engine's currently jacked up. I've unbolted the engine from the car and just lifted it up where it is. The gearbox and stuff is still attached on its mounts. 2CV mounts are quite big and rubbery, so you can do that. I haven't lifted it much, about that far. And the good thing about the front end of a 2CV is there's not much car there. So there's a bolt here, there's a bolt here, there's one on the outside down there, there's a couple up here for this panel, which I'm not going to be removing from this one, and there's one inside here. And what I can actually do is I can remove the whole side. Of the car. Like that. This, incidentally, is the reason why you do not want to crash a 2CV, but it makes it great to work on. So, as you can see, this is the intake manifold and this is the exhaust manifold. On a 2CV, they're actually welded together. The reason for that is in winter, when it's -6, air-cooled carburetors can actually freeze on the motorway. It's something Beetles have a problem with, but not with the 2CV. So the exhaust on Jolene passes out the front of the exhaust manifold, so it goes forwards, then it goes round the front of the engine. The centre section of the exhaust fits underneath the engine here, and then goes back, and the rear section of the exhaust fits underneath the gearbox, and fits to 2 bolts on the gearbox. So it's pretty tight in there, which is why taking the whole front of the car off helps. So one of the things with a 2CV exhaust is that on a normal car you would start here and work your way backwards, but Citroens being Citroens, on a 2CV you actually start at the back and work your way forwards. The reason for that is, you know, you kind of bolt everything loosely into position and then you tighten it all up from the back forwards. And the reason is, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're pulling on the fitting on the end of the exhaust manifold. Hello, Napoleon. And the reason for that is that you can actually pull the fitting off the end of the exhaust. So we'll get it all set up, we'll get it all fitted, and then we'll tighten it all up. Right, let's get sorted. Come on, Cat, you need to get out of the way. The reason why you can't pull this out forwards, you can, but it's very, very difficult, is the flange on the actual centre section itself, and the fact the bumper's in the way. And the bumper is more of a pain in the backside to take off than the wing is, believe it or not. So, you just pull it forward. Now the hardest part of fitting this exhaust is the fact that this bolt here holds the engine and the gearbox together. It's one of 4 bolts that do so. And if you don't take the wing off, you've got to try and fit your hand behind this pan here on the bottom of the engine, which on an earlier 2CV is actually fixed in place. So you've got to kind of crush your hand through a hole to try and you can't get a socket on it because this is the actual brake drum. So you can't get a socket on it because the brake drum's in the way. You can't get a proper spanner on it, so you end up having to cut the end off a spanner. It's a nightmare. So it's much easier just to take that wing off, and there's 2 washers on it, and this exhaust flange goes between these 2 washers, and then you tighten it up. It's that simple. And the rear box hangs off some bolts which are in here. Put the camera in so you can check it out. This is the benefit of having such a small camera. These bolts here, these bolt holes should I say, and it should just hook on. It's one of those things that is very simple in theory but very difficult in practice. If I can get it on the other side of the washer. Filming these things is incredibly difficult because obviously Like, I can't see what I'm doing. If I can't see what I'm doing, how are you guys gonna? I'm just gonna lie under here and cry for a while. Don't mind me. So it would appear that the holes in these hangers are too small. So as you can see, this is the hole from the old exhaust. This is the hole from the new exhaust. The hole's just not big enough. So I'm gonna have to file it out so it looks the same. You see that? New one, old one, new one, old one. Yeah, that's no good. Okay, so it's about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours after you last saw us. It's been absolutely binning it down, and it's still raining a little bit now. If it starts raining again, we're gonna have to go inside. It's horrendous weather today. Yesterday it was nearly 30 degrees, believe it or not. This stuff is exhaust paste. Oh, we've got the back box on. The box that runs under the exhaust, you can actually see it here. The box that runs under the exhaust that goes around just there. You can see it, and it runs longitudinally behind the exhaust. And this pipe now is ready to go in. So remember, we put this one on first, then we put this one on, and then we connect it up to the manifold, because you don't want to put any pressure on here. And this stuff is exhaust mastic. When you fit an exhaust and you have to slide two pieces together, this originally doesn't need mastic on the clamp, but because it's a pattern part, it's not the original thing. I'm going to use some anyway, just to make sure I get that really good seal, because metal doesn't like to seal to metal. And there's no point doing all this work and then putting the wing back on and all that, and then finding out I've got an exhaust leak. So I'm just going to smear a little bit on, and it tends to separate in the tube, so I'm giving it a good shake. This stuff does anyway. And it comes in a bunch of different colours. Some of it's blue. This stuff is like a creamy colour, and it tends to spooge out all of a sudden, this one. Right, try and get this on there. It's one of those jobs where you need about 10 hands. Let me describe to you what's happening here. This flange should be there. The exhaust's lined up here. See that? Right. The exhaust's lined up here. The exhaust is not lined up there. But the original bracket has like a kink in it. So I might actually have to bend the bracket. I don't know. I'll try and get it lined up everywhere else first, and then see what. So the fitment issue I have is these two brackets. If you look, this bracket has a bend in it, but this bracket is straight. Now I thought it was to make up for the fact that this tube is off centre and this one is central, but I actually think that because obviously, as you can see, this is quite a smaller pipe than this one. I think that this is a 13 horsepower exhaust, an original spec 13 horsepower exhaust, and this is an 18. But dimensions wise, the engines are the same. And I didn't spot how much smaller this was before. So the problem we have now is that we need to bend this bracket like this, which will be a bit of a challenge because that's quite thin and easily bent, whereas that's pretty strong stuff. So yeah, that's the next challenge. Nothing ever bolts on. So we've now dropped the engine, and after some tweaking we've got the exhaust to fit. The problem was that when they welded the exhaust up at the factory, this pipe was actually out of whack, and so was the bracket. So we had to, luckily we had the original in reasonable nick, so we were able to hold the two next to each other, heat them up and bend them to where it all needed to be. Like I said before, this is one of the problems that happens with panel parts. Sometimes, obviously, the car that they copy off just isn't the same as the car that you have. This is a problem with a lot of vehicles, but it's part of having a car of this age, unfortunately. Sometimes you've just got to be a little bit ingenious and a bit patient. But the engine's down, it's not bolted in properly yet, but the exhaust is on. I've got a special spanner for doing up the 7mm bolt that's on the back of that. It's basically a spanner with the end cut off. So we've managed to get the end clamp on. Nothing's hitting the chassis, exhaust not hitting the chassis. We had a little bit of a problem lifting the back box up high enough, but once I dropped the engine off the jack, the engine's now bolted in. Once I dropped the engine off the jack, it just popped straight up. So like I said, this bit was bent out of shape, and so was the bracket. It happens when you're welding stuff. You have to do it in a jig, and you have to cool it down with an air hose as you do it, as you work, because otherwise everything warps and twists as it heats up. And that's simply, I think, what had happened in the factory, and it was just dramatically off. But we've sorted it out now and got it all fitted, and I'm glad that Jolene finally has the 18 horsepower exhaust that she deserves. She might actually have 18 horsepower now. I might be stunned by the performance. Doubt it, but stranger things have happened. So yeah, now like I said, I've just got to button everything up now. Loads of bolt tightening. One of the great things about 2CVs, is that everything's 12mm nearly. Like almost every single thing on this engine uses a 12mm spanner. 7mm bolt with a 12mm head. And so you can do most of a reassembly just with one spanner, move from one place to another. You may have noticed in my first video with Jolene called Ooh La La, I wore a pair of sunglasses that were made out of old welding glasses that are actually made of this stuff. It's called Tufnell, and it's like an old engineering plastic, and it's seriously cool stuff. I think it's super nasty, or it was once when it was made. Super nasty for the environment. What we're doing? What we're doing, Miriam? There we go. It helps if you get it on the right way around. Yeah, it's one of those early plastics. There's very little plastic actually in Jolene. Even the dashboard, which appears to be plastic, is fiberglass, which in those days was a state-of-the-art aerospace material. The great thing about you doing your car and you working on your car and you building your car yourself is that you know where absolutely everything goes. So if you ever have a problem, it's your fault. No, if you ever have a problem, you know where to put stuff and where stuff goes just from memory. Right, I need a teeny tiny spanner. So now we've almost finished and the engine can actually run. Sod's law, isn't it? As soon as I'm nearly finished, we have nice beautiful blue sky. We had sunshine a moment ago. It was only for a moment, but we did have it, I promise. Nearly there. I've had crap weather all day. And as soon as you finish, it's nice. So, the last big bits are going on now. And this is a bit finicky, so forgive me if I'm quiet for a second. You've got to get it lined up just right. There we go. It literally secures with these giant aluminium nuts. 19mm, I think they're the same size as I think they're the same size as the wheel nuts, in fact. Look, sugar. Not supposed to do that. Right, I need a 19mm ratchet. And then, a small Allen key. And then, we're ready to start. Okay, so now I've got a shiny new exhaust on and Jolene's all buttoned up. Time for the moment of truth. Will she start? Of course she will. She might be a bit smoky. When they make the exhausts, obviously when they cut the metal they use oil to cool the tools. So, starts with a bit of choke.